Welcome to Digging Deeper into Spiritual Practices, a Spiritual Seedlings interview series with Nancy Flinchbaugh. I am the author of several books, including Awakening, a contemplative primer on learning to sit. I want my readers to have opportunities to learn more about the spiritual practices discussed in my book. So I'm interviewing some contemplative experts. You can find out more about my books and find other interviews on my website at spiritualseedlings.com. Today I'll be interviewing Loretta Brodman Farmer, a spiritual director and also a program mentor with Wellstreams, a spiritual director training program of the Spirituality Network in Columbus, Ohio. I'll be talking with Loretta about the sacred conversation of spiritual direction.
Good morning. I'm Nancy Flinchbaugh with Spiritual Seedlings, and today I am interviewing Loretta Farmer, who is a spiritual director, and she's actually my spiritual director. And we're going to talk a little bit about the art of spiritual direction, which Loretta does so wonderfully. I've been so blessed to have her in my life, and I think you'll enjoy meeting her and learning about how she became a spiritual director. So I'd like to start by asking you, Loretta, just to tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to become a spiritual director.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. I'm originally from New York. I moved here 52 years ago when Gary and I got married, and I've been in Grove City ever since. We have two grown daughters, and 4 grandchildren. And I always worked in the area of religious education. And in 1988, I was very aware that listening to people was something I really felt drawn to. So I kept sitting with that and applied for a residency at Mount Carmel West in hospital chaplaincy. And I completed that in a year. And I felt called to sit with people in the hospital setting, but there was something still missing for me. So I spent the summer discerning and being a little mad at God because I spent that whole year. It was full time and the tuition was expensive. So I spent that summer grappling with that. And I found my own spiritual director in 1978. So I had been with her since then. And I completed hospital chaplaincy training in 1989. So I was discerning with my own spiritual director. What does this mean that I went through all this training and I don't feel quite like it's a fit? I felt like I was good at it, but there was something missing. So she suggested maybe God was calling me to be a spiritual director. And I remember my first reaction, really, Noreen? Who would come to me? So I sat with that, and then I applied for Shalane. And back then, that was in 1990, they didn't have local training. So my choices were Chicago or Shalane in Bethesda, Maryland. And I chose that one because I could still do most of the course study work here locally, and I only had to do 2 residencies in DC. So that was a 3-year program. And after that, it felt like a fit. And I think the word I kept hearing through my training was the gift of listening. And I remembered when I found my own spiritual director, the 2 things I remembered the most was that I could say anything and I was truly heard, and that it wouldn't be judged or repeated. And that was a new experience for me, that I could actually process out loud with another person, knowing that God was present. So I wanted to pass that gift on. And then I landed here, and that's what I've been doing ever since. And I'm very grateful for the privilege to sit with people.
Okay, well, thank you. It sounds like quite a wonderful journey that you found an aha moment. This is where God is calling you, and that's a wonderful feeling. You've told us a little bit, but can you explain exactly what a spiritual director is? I know some people don't really know about this yet.
Well, that's been a challenge for me to explain it to other people. When people ask me that, I guess the basics is I feel like I am privileged to listen to someone else's sacred story and be aware of God in those moments, leading the both of us. It's a two-way street. So as I sit with others, God is also sitting with me. And it's really a sacred time of just hearing someone and then listening and discerning in my own journey, what is God inviting me to? How is God inviting me to grow through this experience with this other person?
What sort of training do you have to become a spiritual director? You said you had 3 years.
Yes, that was through Shalane, and that at that time it was located in Bethesda, Maryland. Now we have a local program called Well Streams that's connected with the Spirituality Network, and that is also 3 years, but it's because of COVID, they're doing it virtually. But you can be with a group and have meetings. Now they're doing via Zoom, but it's easier because you have more of a local community to have that process with. And I supervise in that program. So when the person first starts, they do a year of mostly coursework. And then the second year, they start the practicum, and they're assigned a supervisor, and they meet with 2 directees that are, we find those for them, people who volunteer. And then they meet with the supervisor and do verbatims and start processing how God is speaking to them through this experience of sitting with others.
Okay, so, and there's also some reading involved, or do you?
Yes, there's a book list and paper writing and group experiences. They're in triads in the beginning, so they meet with a group that helps them process, and then they move into a peer group so that they can continue to process. And when you become a spiritual director through the network, through Well Streams, it's required that you have your own spiritual director and your own process for supervision, which most of the time is a peer group, or you can have an individual supervisor.
That sounds like quite an involved process, but I guess you want to be very careful that people understand what direction means, maybe not necessarily directing the person as much as listening and helping them listen for God.
Exactly. And we really encourage people to find a spiritual director before they even move into the program. Because quite frankly, my own spiritual director over the years has taught me more how to sit with people than the book experience.
So having the experience is really important if
You're
going to actually do it. So if you're talking to somebody maybe who's never had a spiritual director before, why would you say this might be a helpful process to help them in their life journey?
Well, I think that it's an opportunity. It's not therapy, but it's an opportunity to hear yourself speak out loud and have another person witness your words, and both of you know that the presence of God is real in those times. So God is inviting you to move to maybe a different level of awareness.
Okay. What's it like for you being a spiritual director? And
Well, I think it's probably the most humbling, life-giving experience I've ever had. I'm 72. My husband retired 10 years ago. And people ask me, why are you still working, Loretta? And my answer to that is, when I sit with people, it's humbling, life-giving, and God works within me and invites me to different awarenesses. So I can't imagine, as long as I can hear, not doing some form of that.
well, so it's feeding you even as it's helping the other people.
Absolutely.
And if somebody would like to become a spiritual director, where could they look for training? You mentioned 2 places, I think.
Yes, those are the 2 that I'm familiar with. If someone wants to do it locally, I would suggest they call the Spirituality Network.
In Ohio.
Yeah,
Right?
in Ohio. And they have a website, and Wellstreams is on that website. So they could really find out what's involved, what experience they might be open to. Or if they want to do something further away, Shalane would be an option. And most of the coursework you do on your own, the reading and the paper writing, and then you send it in, and they respond through the mail. And then you have 2 residencies, 2 weeks each, which is very intense. I mean, when I went, we started at 8:00 in the morning and probably didn't end until 9 that evening, because you're processing a lot of what you've learned over the year. So I think Wellstreams might be a little more manageable for most people.
If somebody just wanted to find a spiritual director, how could they find a spiritual director?
Well, if they're local, they could call the network, and they have a process where you would meet with someone at the network, and they would give you 3 names to take home and pray about, and possibly meet with each person, because it's about the fit. Someone could be a really wonderful spiritual director, but if it's not a fit for you and you don't feel like you connect, it's very important to listen to that. And I say to people all the time, the people that I meet with, if this feels like we're not connecting, let's talk about that. And I will help you find a person you can connect with, because that's the most important thing.
Yeah, people are so different, aren't they? And I know I've had several different spiritual directors, and each is so unique, and each of them have been wonderful, but some I know I'm fit with better than others,
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed
It's important to listen to that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed being your directee. So I appreciate you taking this time to talk about this and share this ministry with other people, and maybe they can either become a directee, or even some of them may feel that call to be a spiritual director. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we finish this interview?
Not really, Nancy, just that I have been blessed being your director.
Okay. Well, it's a 2-way street, I guess. You're a blessing to me, and I'm a blessing to you. The best of both worlds. So thank you so much for this interview. And now I'll give you a few resources so that you can contact the organizations that Loretta talked about today.
Okay, there's one other thing, Nancy. If you're not local, it's called Spiritual Directors International, and they have a whole website. So for example, if you're in Ohio, you move to Iowa, you can go on that website and find local spiritual directors in that area, and they will help you.
I also have a friend, Therese Taylor Stinson, who started a Spiritual Directors of Color network. And so if you're a person of color, you can go onto that website and look specifically for spiritual directors of color, because sometimes that's important to have somebody who understands your journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So thank you again, Loretta, and have
You're
a good day.
Thank
And I'll
you.
see you again in a few weeks.
Okay. Bye, Nancy. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to this interview with Loretta Brodman Farmer, a spiritual director and also a program mentor with the Spiritual Direction Training Program of Wellsprings with the Spirituality Network of Columbus, Ohio. If you are looking for a spiritual director, the Spirituality Network in Columbus, Ohio has a referral service in which they will refer you to 3 potential spiritual directors, and then they encourage you to interview each of them to find the one that most fits with your spiritual life. There's also a directory of spiritual directors on the Spiritual Directors International website, and the Spirituality Directors of Clever also host a directory if you're looking specifically for a spiritual director of color. And most of these programs have sliding scales for you so that you can afford this based on your income. And need to ask your spiritual director when you interview them what charges they request. If you would like to consider being trained as a spiritual director, Wellstreams with the Spirituality Network of Ohio provides a 3-year certificate program for training spiritual directors. Also, the Shalem Institute for Spiritual Formation in Washington, D.C. provides training through their program, Nurturing the Call, a spiritual guidance program, which also provides a 3-year training program with several in-person residencies and other parts which are distance learning. This has been a Spiritual Seedlings interview with Nancy Flinchbaugh. You can find out more about spiritual direction in my book, Awakening, a contemplative primer on learning to sit. Visit my website at spiritualseedlings.com and look for the Awakening book and index on the left side menu. Have a good day.